The four freedoms, outlined years ago by an American president, first inspired artist Norman Rockwell. But they've also inspired a new generation of artists, as Anna Werner now shows us.
This is what the German Air Force has done to our beautiful London. Pictures that look like hell on earth.
It's January 1941. War rages in Europe. And President Franklin Delano Roosevelt must convince Americans their country will have to enter the war against the Nazis.
I address you at a moment unprecedented in the history of the Union.
So in the midst of one of the most dire periods in history, he delivered a speech. Key to that speech, the four freedoms, goals he believed were worth fighting for.
We look forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms.
The four freedoms, as articulated, did not garner much attention.
Lori Norton Moffat is the director of the Norman Rockwell Museum.
Americans had little appetite to return to war. World War I had been devastating in its consequences. America was still coming out of the Great Depression, and there were many people who were still struggling for housing and jobs and food.
So the speech fell flat until artist Norman Rockwell took Roosevelt's words and translated them into these iconic American images. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear.
He realized he needed to take these ideas down to everyday life, things that everyone anywhere could appreciate.
When they were published in 1943 in one of the nation's top-selling magazines, the Saturday Evening Post, the pictures were seen by millions.
They just took off across the country with meaning and patriotism and people feeling deeply.
The paintings went on tour and helped raise $133 million for the war effort.
Do you have any idea of how many copies have been made of those paintings?
I don't really know. I know it runs into millions and millions.
And now they're traveling again, this time in an exhibition to celebrate their 75th anniversary, with its first stop at the New York Historical Society.
So this would have been actually a luxury, almost for many people, to have a dinner like this.
This was an aspirational dinner.
But what do the four freedoms mean today?
This is a reinterpretation of the freedom from fear.
A companion exhibit on display at Hunter College in New York City seeks to answer that question. Deborah Gardner is curator.
In some cases, it's a direct reference to the Norman Rockwell paintings. They take the four freedoms, the original images, and they transform the people in them to reflect much greater religious diversity and ethnic diversity.
Artists from across the U.S. and Canada submitted their work. 39 were chosen, including an Iranian-American photographer with this image and a courtroom artist from New York with a painting of a child living in a war zone. Norman Rockwell's granddaughter, artist Daisy Rockwell, is also featured in the exhibit. She contributed a group of portraits, mugshots of women facing jail time.
Freedom of speech.
And then there's the work of Massachusetts artist Pops Peterson. His reinterpretation of the four freedoms combines photography with digital painting techniques.
Norman Rockwell was the quintessential all-American painter. He showed you the American landscape. Everyone being loved, everyone safe, except not if you're Mexican, not if maybe you're Hindu, not if you're black.
So in Peterson's version of Rockwell's freedom of speech, instead of a young white man, there's an African-American woman. For freedom from want, with its traditional Thanksgiving table, Peterson shows himself with his husband. And his freedom of worship depicts a Baptist minister preaching to people of varying faiths. And then there's freedom from fear, Rockwell's image of a family at bedtime, the father holding a newspaper that speaks of bombings and horror.
You called it freedom from what?
Really?
Because...
Do we have freedom from fear? No. What do we have freedom from?
What you're really saying is, for a lot of people, those freedoms don't exist.
Exactly. And the fear does exist.
So in his image, an African-American man putting his children to bed looks over his shoulder. The newspaper headline here, I Can't Breathe, a reference to Eric Garner, who died after police put him in a chokehold in 2014.
I just want to show what's going on the other side of the railroad tracks.
And that's really emotional for you. Because?
Because we're always there and nobody looking. I mean, it was really nice in the suburbs for the nice white family to be safe from the blitzkrieg. I mean, obviously they were representing all Americans. And this is a current image. And the father's just wondering, what is going on my street? Can I leave the house safely?
In 2018, says Peterson, there are still freedoms to fight for.
That people count, that people belong, and that people have the right to be heard and to be seen.